Yeah, but today's date is February 15th, 2021. Mortgages, how do they work? Yeah,
Is this
Martine.
lesson long?
Not really.
I don't know what a mortgage is.
That's not a good thing. I thought I already kind of went over it, but
Did you go over it last time?
yeah. Oh, maybe you're not here today. You're a senior, right?
Yeah.
And seniors were gone that day, and you guys have made up the notes, so.
Oh yeah, it's the day that I told you I didn't want to go. I still went.
That's right. Okay.
Didn't you have like a meeting with Christina? Yeah, I didn't want to go.
Yeah. The video's up if you want to find it.
All right.
I'll be re-explaining the mortgage today more in depth, so it's okay. All right, so let's talk to our friend Bob. Bob has a house. Draw a picture of a house. My picture is obviously going to be superior to Lorea's in every aspect. There is my house. Lorea, try to one-up me. I doubt you can do it. It's pretty beautiful already.
The roof is slanted.
It's artistic. It's meant to be like that. This house has a sticker price of 500,000. I'm gonna say 500K because I ran out of room. This is the sticker price, and there's my very artistic way of putting the sticker price on that house. Meet your friend Bob. This is Bob. He has a hat. Try to one up my hat, but you can't do that either. This is my friend Bob. He's smiling because he has a very expensive, nice house for $500,000. I'm going to be very interested in your ability of art at the very end for each of your lessons. I want to buy Bob's house. I don't have $500,000, but I'm going to lie and I'll tell you I have $125,000 saved up in my bank because I'm a prudent person. I'm investing. I know I eventually want to buy a house. Of course, it would be better to just have $500,000 and just give it all in cash, and I don't have to worry about a mortgage. But unfortunately, I'm going to need a loan because I don't have enough money. So meet me. Meet me. This is me. I have a mustache. There's my mustache. Yeah, that's the only facial characteristic I'm going to be able to draw right there. I have money. I don't have a house. I have money. How much money do I have? I have $125,000 in my bank account. It is fluid. It is not currently invested. It is ready to go into Bob's bank account. But wait a sec. You don't, but you should. But you don't. You can also put a hat on yourself as well, too. Maybe give yourself a fro or earrings. I don't know. Make it personalizable. These are your notes. I want to buy Bob's house. I don't have enough money, so I'm going to need some help. Welcome to the bank. Here is the bank. Also, a really awesome picture. There's the bank. Again, it's going to be this slanted roof because the bank is fashionable. Here's the bank. They have money. The bank's like, yo, you're missing, what is 500 minus 125? You're missing $375,000. We got you. Here, we're going to give you $375K. But in return, you are going to have to give us something because obviously that's a lot of money. So what does Bob have? Bob has what's called the title. So here's this piece of paper. He also has this thing called the title. It means he owns the home. It's a title to the home. It's a document that I think it's actually physical, but it's also backed up electronically, I hope, because it's a lot of money for that title. Bob has the title. So here is the general way that the transaction works. Bank's like, yo, when you pay Bob for the title, give us the title. So this is what happens. Now, if you add up 375 plus 125, guess what? It adds up to 500 because I think I did the math correctly, but you should maybe double check me. I'm sometimes wrong. I'm human. I can now give Bob 500,000. So, new arrow here. I give Bob 500K. Bob, the reason he's smiling is because he just got 500K. He got $500,000. And in return, he gives you the title, which doesn't go to you, it goes to the bank. So now this title goes to the bank. Bank now owns the title to the house. And you get to repay that gigantic loan of $375,000 slowly over time. That $375,000 loan is the mortgage. That's what we typically refer to the mortgage. Although sometimes you can refer to this process that I'm describing with a bunch of arrows and mustaches and houses as the mortgage as well. But I'm going to go ahead and label that $375K. That's what we're talking about today. This is called the mortgage. Mortgage. Spelled weird. By the way, mortgage. Do you guys see kind of the words that make up that word? Let me analyze it. Mortgage. Mortgage. Does anyone French know French? I'm gonna look at the twins because they're very worldly. All right. Well, does anyone know what mort sounds like?
Death?
Yeah, death, mortality, the ability to die, right? This is death. What about gauge?
Like a gauge?
Like you kind of measure something?
Measure something, you can gauge how things. There's also being engaged, right? Any other gauge words that you know?
Like gauges?
Gauges, yeah. Gauges in your ears, right?
How much time is left, right?
Not really, but good guess. This just means it's a pledge.
That's pledge.
If you think of being engaged, that's probably the best way to think of the word or the root gauge.
You're gonna die?
Yeah, this is a death pledge. This is the best way to understand what a mortgage is. And I'm not even joking. It is a death pledge. If you die, the bank gets it. If you default on your loan, if you can't pay off that $375,000, they get it. It is a pledge to the death.
So if you die, your kids don't get
Well,
it?
that's why you want some sort of will of testament saying, my son will take over my loan, my mortgage. So the bank just doesn't come in and take it. But yeah, if you don't have a will, the bank gets it because you made a death pledge to them and they get your house. They get your title. Yeah.
But he's having the money to get the house, but you still get a mortgage.
Ask the question again.
What if you have enough money to get the house, but you still get a mortgage?
You have $500,000, but you still want a mortgage?
Yeah.
You could do that, yeah. And it's not a bad idea, right? So say you're in the same scenario, but instead of having $125,000, you have $500,000. You're like, can I still get a loan or a mortgage for $375,000? Bank's like, yeah, sure. And then what do you do with your $375,000? Into the stock market, you're making more money than the mortgage is actually making. It's not a bad strategy. Big brain, right? But you have to be careful. The stock market is volatile. You might make negative money. As I saw from the stock market from last round, that might not be a good idea. All right. So let's continue on with this. By the way, I should point out that I chose $125,000 very carefully. That's 25%. That makes it so I don't have to pay the mortgage insurance, but I don't want to get into that yet. Let's talk about assets versus liabilities. Let's get some vocab in here. Vocab. I like rectangles because they're easy to draw to talk about amount of money. So guess what? You have an asset now because you have a house, kind of. The title's still owned by the bank, but here's a giant block of money. Boom, boom, boom. This represents the money that your house is worth. This is called an asset. Why is it called an asset? Well, because you get to live in it. It's kind of a nice thing to have. Eventually, you'll have so much equity in the house. I'll get to that in a sec. You'll pay off the house to where it becomes fully yours. But the problem with having this asset is you have a liability. Your liability is your debt. It is your mortgage. So off to the side here in a different color, I'll say that, and again, you should make this about 1 or 3/4 of the amount if you're kind of drawing this to scale. You have these two pieces here. So your asset, your house was worth or is worth $500,000. If we want to get really complex, we will say this housing price fluctuates and it's dependent upon the general market of housing. It depends on your neighbors. Does your neighbor have that lawn that they just never mow? Is it deteriorating? Are they not upkeeping it? Well, that makes your house look bad because you have bad neighbors. Yes, it can drive down the price. You have a liability. This orange piece right here, let's label that. That's a liability. How much money of liability are you at right now? You're at 375,000. Oh, forgot the 5. 370. There, 75K worth of liability, because that's your debt. You can say that that's your debt. You can call it mortgage, whatever you want to say. I'm just going to call it debt. You have negative $375,000, which sounds like a lot, and it's because it is. This will be the biggest purchase of your life usually. But if you can one up that and buy an island, then kudos to you. Come back, throw some cash at Mr. Sandell. Why just an island? 2 islands.
No, how much, but how much?
Oh, how much are they? It depends on the island.
Like just a good sized island.
A good size island? I have no idea off the top of my head. I'd have to. Should we go on a brief tangent class? How much does a small island cost? Someone knows what we're looking for.
100,000.
London is about 750. Manhattan, 970,000. Yeah. All right. Well, now you know.
I might buy an island.
But what happened to the $125,000 that you gave Bob? Because you did have some money. You're not just all in liability. You have what's called equity in your house. So this green word down here is called equity. You have $125,000 that's going into your house. And eventually what's going to happen is the longer that you pay off your mortgage, this green equity is going to eventually overtake your orange liability until it's completely covered and you paid off your house. So it will eventually be sliding in the correct direction. Again, if you default on your loan where you can't pay off your loan, you're just like, nah, I'm going to let it go for a few months. No, the bank's going to be like, get out. It is our house. Look, we own this title, and we're going to sell it to someone else that can actually pay this thing off. All right, so let's go ahead and look at some math, I think. Some math. I think for the lights, Jose, do you mind hitting them for us? You might have to stand up for this. You're not taking notes, so come on, stand up. Let's look at this. Can I change my zoom? View, zoom. Let's go 200%. There we go. All right, so I'm going to make a lot of assumptions here. My interest rate is 5.5%, which is high. Like, let's go ahead and just Google this on the fly here. Average interest rate for a home loan, yeah, for a mortgage. Oh, it's about 3.99%. Let's go ahead and just change our story here. Let's just make this 4%. Yes, we did buy $500,000 worth of home. We have 25% down payment because I made that much money. You can say over here, make sure that is the text color still white. That means I paid $125K. So that means my initial loan, which is also called the mortgage, I can call this the mortgage over here, is $375,000. And this we don't have to worry about yet, but it depends on what tax bracket you're in. Again, we haven't got to the unit on taxes, but it is a kind of a fun story to talk about what bracket you're in. You can just, the general statement I should make right now is when you make a lot more money, when your amount of money overflows into the next bracket, that overflow is taxed at a higher rate. But everyone pays the same amount for the first few brackets that they're in, and then once they overflow into a new amount, they only pay that percent on that new amount. I think I might have made that more complicated than it needs to be, but just know that you can be in a lower tax bracket. All right, so how do I get 0.33%? Any ideas? .33%. Well, how many months are there in a year? 12. What was the original rate? Interest rate? 4. So this is literally saying 4. This number right here divided by 12. This is what we're going to be paying every month. 0.33% monthly interest rate. And what does that mean? That means for us, each month I'm going to be paying $1,790. That's kind of like my rent. That's the thing that I'm paying towards my mortgage. So far, so good? Questions up to this point? No? All right. So I want to show you this table over here. So on month one, you're thinking, wait, this used to be $375,000. Why is it already up to $376,000? Well, it's because you already get interest. $1,250 interest has accrued because this is 0.33% of your total mortgage. So that 0.33% as a decimal is 0.033. Multiply that by your mortgage, you get this number. So far, so good? You understand where interest is coming from. All right, so add that to the original mortgage amount, and this is the amount of money that I now have to pay off. How much do I pay every single month? This is a fixed amount of money. You can decide to pay more, but to think of this as your interest, or think of this as your rent payment every month. Every month is the same amount. You're making the same payment over and over. The cool thing about this story, which might change for you guys if you're going to be a little bit more on the risky end, is that this interest rate is locked in. It's called a fixed interest rate. You can decide to have a variable interest rate, but I usually don't recommend that unless you really, really know what you're doing, and even then I still don't recommend it. But this is me being the person that doesn't really know anything about houses. It's just from what I've seen. Like, you don't want to ever have this go up to like 5% on a month that you can't afford rent. Like, if you're just barely making ends meet and it fluctuates up higher, you're in a terrible spot. But I will also say this, variable interest rates are typically a little bit lower than normal interest rates. You just have to plan for the fluctuations. Coming back to our story. So you pay off $1,790 from this total balance. So I do this number minus this number to get my new loan balance because I paid off this amount. So far, so good. All right. Gunnar is looking at his computer screen. So is Aurelia. Close the laptop so I know you're paying attention. All right. So equity, again, it's that word. How much money has gone into the house? I put $125,000 originally, and it's gone up only by $540. What? I paid $1,790. Should this go up by $1,790? Why did it only go up by $540.31?
Taxes.
Don't ignore tax savings for right now. It should have gone up more. Can anyone tell me why? Got to laptop close.
The bank and the person who you bought the house from need to split it?
Mm-hmm. Good guess. It's on this table. You can see it.
Is it interest?
Interest. There it is. Look at this. I paid. This is how much I paid. $1,790. But I had to pay $1,250 in interest, which means the leftover amount in my payment goes towards my principal to build in my equity. I know I'm tossing around a lot of words, but I'm hoping you're going to get more familiar with them. Which kind of stinks, because you'd think that that whole amount of money does go into your principal, and it doesn't. But look at this. The next month, if I come back here to month 2, my interest is less. Why? Because I paid off a little bit of my loan. I paid off $540 of my loan, more than I had last month. So my interest is a little bit less, about $1.80 less, exactly $1.80 less. Let's round to $2. So the next month I have $2 less of interest, but when I'm comparing it on the grand scheme of things, $1,200, it's barely impacting it. And then the same practice goes over and over again. I make the same payment. The loan balance does go down by a little bit. The equity only goes up by $542. Hey, but it's more than last time. By $1.80. $1.80, right? And when you think about this thing, these are slopes. They take forever to go away. And it's because of interest. Most of your money is going into interest. And I want to show you this chart too. This is a chart that kind of represents this whole story. There it is, okay. So on month 1, if I want to be thinking over here, this is the amount of principal that goes into my house. You can see that light blue is principal. And then most of my money is just trying to pay off the interest on my loan. Look at that. It's a crazy percent. But over time, very slowly over time, I should mention, look at this. 72 months. That's 6 years by this point. We have a long, long time until we're paid off for our house. Usually houses are fixed rate at 30 years or 15 years. This is obviously the 30 years, because that's 6 and then times 5, yeah. So over here, this is 30 years. After 30 years, I will have paid off my house. And you can see when I'm getting closer and closer to the 30 years, that I'm getting more and more of the payments are going directly towards my principal. I'm building more and more equity. I don't have to pay as much for interest because my interest is lower since my actual mortgage, the loan, is also smaller. Do you kind of understand the story? The main thing I want you to take away is when you're paying off your house, you're mostly paying off interest at the very beginning, and it stinks. It's really unfortunate, but that's how the system works. All right, go ahead and grab a seat. I want to talk a little bit more about that column that I told you to ignore. I told you to ignore the tax savings column. Let me talk about that. And I did talk about it in our last lesson, but I'll review it today, which is this. When I make a payment, this is the amount of money that I'm saving, assuming that I'm in this tax bracket. And even more specifically, let's add this to the notes. The one really, really nice thing about houses is this. Interest. Interest is tax deductible. And I'll put a few exclamation points because that's really, really, really nice. And I still have a lot of units to go through this class yet. But what does that mean? What does tax deductible means? We've already talked about when we make investments that if I go in something like a traditional IRA, not the Roth IRA, then I don't pay any capital tax gains. I talked about tax there. But tax basically works like this. I'll give a brief overview like this. So if I make, let me give an example down here. Here's my example. Example for the sake of taxes. So I'll call it the tax example, I guess. If I make, let's make the numbers really nice, $100,000 a year, which would be really nice. I will be there one day. If I make $100K per year, that's a lot of money each year. That probably means I'm in the 35% tax bracket. I think right now I'm in the 24% tax bracket. I'll have to go check though. This implies that I'm in the 35% tax bracket. And once we actually learn how to do taxes, you'll realize that this is not how taxes work at all. It's how I talked about earlier, it's like an overflow. But let's just go ahead and make it as simple as possible. Let's say 35% of the $100,000. Super, super simple story, very inaccurate now. That means I'm paying $35,000 a year in taxes, which is obviously a lot of money. So how does paying interest on a house help you with your taxes? How do you pay less money every year on your taxes? Well, I can actually come over here and I can count up the interest accrued. So this is getting ahead of myself, but let's go ahead and say in 1 year, no, 1 year is going to be 12 months. So if I add these together, can I do a little formula over here? Sum of these guys. In 1 year, that's a terrible number. Okay, I'm going to make up my own number. Let's go ahead and pretend I pay $100,000 in interest, or $10,000 instead of this $14,000. So $10,000 is a little bit easier of a number. So let's pretend I paid in 1 year. I paid $10,000 in taxes, or sorry, in principal. No, that's what do we call this? In interest. In interest. Obviously, in our spreadsheet, we paid more than that, but let's just make it simple. So $10,000 in interest, that means it's as if I didn't make $10,000. This means it's as if I made $90,000 a year. It treats it as if you made that much less money. And then that money is taxed. And that might be in a new tax bracket now. Maybe it didn't overflow into the 35%. Maybe it's down at 32%. I don't even know if that's a real tax bracket. but you could be in a lower tax bracket, which is nice. And secondly, you just get less money in taxes, because now if I do 90,000 times 35%, okay, numbers were nice, but I still have to do some math. 90 times 0.35, 31.5. Now I'm paying 31.5K per year in taxes, which is a total savings of $4.5 thousand. Pretty nice. And not only that, but I'm also building up my equity in my house. My equity is getting bigger and bigger, which means this. If I decide to sell my house, what happens? Pretend I'm the new Bob. If I want to sell my house and I'm looking at this block chart up here to talk about my liabilities and equities, the more and more money that I build up in my equity by paying off my mortgage every month, again, it was only like $540, what was it, the first time? It doesn't go up by that much per month until the very end of your mortgage, down there at 30 years in the future. But eventually this does get bigger. Equity does get bigger, and I sell my house. All right, Sally. Sally comes and buys my house. Guess what happens? She gets her loan from the bank, her mortgage, and she pays you the asset worth. Okay, we're going to make our story super simple. Let's pretend that the house didn't fluctuate in price. Sally pays you $500,000. Well, what happens? First of all, your debt is gone. Your debt is wiped out. And however much equity in the house you have, that's the money that you get back. Which means you actually get more money back by paying off your mortgage. And that's a big difference with rent. When you pay rent, that money is gone. That money goes to whoever owns the property or the house. Whereas with a house, that money goes into building the equity in the house, which you can get back if you ever decide to sell the house. Or better scenario yet, you just pay off that house in 30 years and you stop paying rent. It's your house. You pay property taxes, which is like, what is that, 1% of your property a year, but it's basically nothing. All right, ask me questions. I know it's kind of a complex story. Yeah, Anna?
If you build your own house, can you just avoid this whole process, or is there still a loan from the bank involved somewhere?
You avoid the entire process if all the materials you can pay for out of your own pocket. Because my dad just built his own house this last 2 years. It took him a long time, and he had to get a mortgage for the supplies to build his house. So he still is trapped in the cycle of being in mortgage debt, but he probably cut costs quite a bit because he did everything himself. So instead of $500,000, maybe it's like $400,000 because $100,000 was him just doing work on the house. So still a better idea, but then the whole problem with that is you need to find a place to live while you're building the house. He lived in his motorhome for 2 years, which is not fun because his shower is about this size. He had to like crouch and do a shower. His water heater was like enough water for about 15 minutes, so divide that by 2 for him and his wife. And yeah, it's a terrible experience for 2 years while you're building the house, but once it's built, yeah, you do save some money. Great question. Other questions?
What about getting one of those pre-made motorhome things?
Those cost a lot less, and there's actually a really cool, sad story with those. Normally, house prices go up, just historically speaking, because inflation, because everything usually goes up. So when housing goes up, like if this turns into $510,000 and I decide to sell it, that's as if I put $10,000 of equity into my house. That's $10,000 more dollars I get in my pocket by just holding onto my house, which is nice. However, mobile homes, the smaller kind of manufactured homes, those typically go down in price each year. You're losing money. Even though you're paying off your equity and it's trying to go up, it's usually either balanced completely by or still going down. So by the time you have paid off your home, you're not going to really be able to make a profit even if you sell it. It's going to be very, very low on your price. So if you're trying to look at buying a house as an investment, I wouldn't recommend a mobile home unless you have no other choice. I would recommend renting over it. But it's still an option. You're still building a little bit of equity, more so than if you're just paying rent. That money's just gone. But just know that those type of homes typically go down in price. All right. Well, that's the end of my lesson then.